Hi guys, I'm just another guy named James, and today I'm going to be talking about these two issues of G.I. Joe, which were released in the spring of 1989. Like most of the other issues of G.I. Joe from the Marvel Comics run, these two issues are written by Larry Hama. This first issue over here is penciled by Marshall Rogers, and then the second issue is penciled by Paul Ryan. Overall, they're kind of interesting stories. They're much more character driven than the last couple of sets of G.I. Joe issues that we've looked at on the channel. I do still like, especially the last G.I. Joe video. Highly recommend checking that one out. That one was really interesting. Featured a lot of new characters. Pretty cool one. Highly recommend that. But anyway, overall, let's get into some details. Like I said, issues are written by Larry Hama, drawn by Marshall Rogers, and then Paul Ryan. They're pretty cool. They're much more character driven, like I just said. But yeah, let's see. There are some background characters, some background details, background characters that you're gonna want to know about, just leading into this. Probably the biggest one for this set of videos is going to be Storm Shadow. So Storm Shadow was, when he was first introduced, he was kind of a disgraced ninja who very clearly had some sort of connection with Snake Eyes. That was quickly revealed to be, the connection was quickly revealed to be that they fought in the Vietnam War together. And that Storm Shadow invited Snake Eyes to live with his with Storm Shadow's ninja clan with him, and the two were were very clearly good friends. Storm Shadow ended up getting framed for the murder of one of the ninja masters of their clan, and then the two kind of reconciled. The two reconciled later when Snake Eyes realized that Storm Shadow hadn't killed the Hardmaster. And yeah, that's kind of, and since then Storm Shadow's been basically just training various people. In this story, we see two of his trainees. We see his protege Jinx and his other protege Billy. Now Billy is another character who has kind of a lot of background going into this. But the biggest piece of background is that he is the son of the original Cobra Commander. And that's kind of, where he sits. He's the son of Cobra Commander. He had been he had been pretty grievously injured in a car crash of some sort. Or not of some sort. We know exactly what happened. He got blown up by a missile launcher, basically. And then, since then he's been training to be a ninja with Storm Shadow. But yeah, then the other two characters that I think are going to be kind of good to know are Zartan, who is this mercenary biker type character. I'm sure you know roughly who Zartan is. And then you have Fred 7, who is currently Cobra Commander. Fred 7 was a Crimson Guardsman who was helping Cobra Commander after Cobra Commander's presumed death in the explosion of the pit. But Fred 7 eventually grew tired of dealing with Cobra Commander, shot him, buried him, and then began to impersonate him. And that's who you've been dealing with for the last 30 or so issues of G.I. Joe. But yeah, so those are kind of your big players. One I would highly recommend checking out the origin of Snake Eyes. There's a video on my channel called G.I. Joe: The Origin of Snake Eyes. It'll be linked in the description. I highly recommend you check that one out either before you watch this or after you watch it. It'll just help add some context to this story. And speaking of the story, let's just hop straight into it. And our story today begins in San Francisco, where we see some mysterious woman walk up to Jinx at her desk and she pulls a gun on her, and she demands that she be taken to see her son, Billy. We then cut to Billy, who is training with Storm Shadow to be a ninja. But the training is interrupted when the pair hears somebody approaching the building. The ninja can tell that one of the people approaching is Jinx, but they can tell that she is being restrained. So when the second woman busts down the door and threatens Jinx, Storm Shadow goes just straight in for a kill with his katana. But Billy, who recognizes the woman's voice, stops him. Billy then reveals his identity to his mother, and the mother immediately notices Billy's missing eye. So Storm Shadow and Jinx leave the two alone so that they can catch up. Billy then explains how Cobra Commander, his father, lied to him, telling a young Billy that his mother had died in a car crash, and how the two of them would have to start over. We then get to see the beginnings of Cobra, how they started by selling ideas and to raise money to become the terrorists that we know today. But yeah, Billy and his mother then share a quick hug after realizing that both of them have been hurt and lied to by Cobra Commander. We then see Fred 7 and Dr. Mindbender are going in to confront and quietly kill off Zartan. But as soon as they get into his residence, a group of Red Ninja grab Fred 7 and take him to Zartan. Zartan then removes Fred's helmet and tells him that he wants to rework the deal that he made with the original Cobra Commander. We then cut back to San Francisco, and we see that Billy's mother is explaining that Cobra Commander began to go off the deep end when his brother died in a car crash. Cobra Commander couldn't accept that his brother could be at fault, so he blamed the other family involved in the crash, even though they all died, leaving only one surviving son, who was not present at the time as he was just then returning from the Vietnam War. And this story seems to strike a chord with Storm Shadow, almost as if he's heard something similar before. We then cut to Zartan, who picks up the very same story, but this time from the perspective of Zartan. And we see Zartan recount how Cobra Commander approached him at a bar, and at that bar, Cobra Commander put a hit out on Snake Eyes, who was at that time training with Storm Shadow's ninja clan. Zartan, having only one lead on the clan's location, sat outside of a swordsmith's dojo for months, waiting for an audience with the swordsmith. He was rumored to make swords for Storm Shadow and Snake Eyes' ninja clan. So the swordsmith, seeing Zartan's resistance, allowed him to join him. And on their journey, the swordsmith even taught Zartan how to make swords. And Zartan absolutely was into making the swords. Folding the steel on himself, he dug it. He was happy. But eventually, Cobra Commander contacted Zartan, threatening to expose his true intentions to the swordsmith unless Zartan killed Snake Eyes. So, we see Zartan attempt to do just that. He uses a bow and arrow. He uses a bow and arrow and a sound amplification device to try to kill Snake Eyes, but instead he kills the Hardmaster. He's using the bow and arrow, and he's wearing a Storm Shadow costume so that he can frame Storm Shadow. But this assassination by Zartan, this careless murder, leads the swordsmith to turn his back on Zartan. We then rejoin the present, where we see that Zartan is setting a trap for Storm Shadow. We then cut back to San Francisco, where we see Storm Shadow lay it out in plain English, where he explains that it was Snake Eyes' family who had died in the car crash. And we knew that Snake Eyes' family had died while on their way to pick Snake Eyes up from his return to Vietnam. So that was something of an interesting revelation. And yeah, and then Billy and his mother decide to they kind of just leave. They go off to start their own life. And we see Storm Shadow and Jinx see an ad for the De Jong Museum where there's a bunch of they see an ad in the paper for it, where there's a bunch of like ancient ninja gear around. We then jump ahead to that very same museum, where we see Jinx wandering around looking at the exhibits, but a specific katana catches her eye, and she recognizes the symbol on the sword as belonging to the ninja clan of Storm Shadow and Snake Eyes. So she runs to the phone booth to call Storm Shadow and tell him, but she doesn't realize that someone is tracing the call. And as the mysterious man walks away from the phone booth, he gives the kill sign. So some of the exhibits seemingly come to life and attack Jinx, and the call to Storm Shadow is never answered. But Jinx is able to dodge and dive roll around the ninjas, and she's able to roll under the katana on display, and she busts through the case to grab it. We then cut to the roof of the building, where we see that the mysterious man is transforming into Zartan, before he hops in a helicopter and heads for the Storm Shadow's dojo. But back in the museum, we see Jinx just slicing up some of these ninjas before she runs outside and hops on a motorcycle. We then cut to the dojo, where we see Storm Shadow gearing up and preparing, as a small army of red ninja jump onto the roof off of their helicopter. But we see Storm Shadow get first blood, as he kills the pilot of the chopper, sending it to the ground. But the red ninja jump in, so Storm Shadow slices and dices his way out, and we also see him absolutely impale a ninja, tossing his katana through a door, because the ninja was about to spray bullets everywhere with an Uzi. We then see Zartan roll out of the helicopter in a bus, as he sets up his own archery setup with a special sound system. We then see another group of ninja come into the dojo, but Storm Shadow again pieces them up, even removing the special harness off of one of the ninja, causing him to get shot by Zartan. Jinx then pulls up and goes chasing after the bus, so Storm Shadow hops down the building, and he rides on the back of the motorcycle, and he's trying to notch an arrow to shoot at Zartan. But Zartan gets a better shot, and he shatters the arrow. So Storm Shadow has to improvise, catching the next arrow shot at him and firing it back, killing the driver of the bus, and seemingly sending Zartan to a watery grave. And that's where her story ends for today. It's a shorter one, but it's pretty solid. And yeah, it is really odd though. So there are a few things. There's kind of a lot going on here. We had already understood the revelation that Zartan was the one who framed Storm Shadow for the death of the Hardmaster. We had learned that however many issues ago. We knew that. We learned that a while ago. But here we get one of the interesting problems that arises in the G.I. Joe comic. And that's that absolutely everything they try to. Larry Hama kind of goes a little off the deep end here on the writing. He's trying to connect every little thing. He's trying to interweave all the characters, and it's it's kind of dumb. Why is Snake Eyes' family the one? Why are Snake Eyes' family and Cobra Commander's family both dying in the same car accident? Why is that? It's an interesting idea, I guess. But it just reads as, everything has to be connected. And you might not get that sense from this specific issue, which is fair, but it becomes, again, more of a problem when you read it in with the entire G.I. Joe comic, because that is a consistent enough problem as the comic goes. The actual, in the present A plot is kind of cool, That second issue, the one with, if you looked, there were no words spoken, no dialogue in that comic. Any words in the panels were sound effects. it's pretty cool. It's something G.I. Joe does every now and then. After the first appearance of Storm Shadow and Silent Interlude, they really started to like doing those silent comics. It kind of became like this is a ninja issue. It's a cool enough idea. Like I dig it, and the artwork by Paul Ryan is good enough that like you don't need the words to explain what's going on, which is nice. I don't think some of the other artists who have been working on G.I. Joe at the time could have done a silent issue. I think that's why they had to go to Paul Ryan. But I don't mind because I do like Paul Ryan's artwork pretty well, honestly. I like it a lot. But yeah, I mean, it's hard. This isn't to say this is a bad story is maybe inaccurate, but it's just kind of rough, especially like in the context of the greater of the comic at the time. You just have a lot of stuff kind of just happening, you know what I mean? Like you have all this stuff with the Dreadnoks just kind of happening. You have this stuff with the Zartan and Cobra Commander kind of just happening. Cobra Commander, Fred 7 just decides he's going to try to kill Cobra Commander for not much of a reason, other than the fact that he doesn't like him. Okay, cool. And then Zartan decides he's going to go after Storm Shadow again, even though that was kind of a plot point that had mostly been, which had seemingly been a plot point that was abandoned. And I didn't like that it was a plot point that went unanswered. But Storm Shadow and Snake Eyes both seemingly left Zartan on his own, which felt clunky, but it was all right, because like you could kind of argue that they just never interacted again. But now you see that Zartan's still. Yeah, like there were a few moments throughout this whole thing where it's like, wait, why aren't Storm Shadow and Snake Eyes why don't they kill Zartan? And it's hard. That is always the question of the G.I. Joe comic is, they're soldiers. Why don't they kill anyone? Why don't they kill the bad guys? They've got all these guns and stuff. Oh, not going to use them, I guess. It is a problem that the G.I. Joe comic has, especially the deeper into it you get, because, it's like, the atrocities are kind of going off the rails here. But I especially don't get why Storm Shadow and Snake Eyes left Zartan alone, because they had this whole big vendetta thing going on against Zartan. There's a whole plot where they literally go to Cobra Island just to kill Zartan, and then they don't. And then it kind of just gets ignored. And then Zartan is now trying to kill off Storm Shadow. And they briefly mention the grudge match between the two of them, but that's not what's actually happening in the comic. It's just kind of odd. But yeah, the actual meat and potatoes of the action of that second issue is really solid. It does end super abruptly, and if you notice when I was recapping the story, I said and Zartan ends up in a seemingly watery grave. I don't think, if I remember right, Zartan stays dead for at most 5 issues. If I'm remembering right, of course. But yeah, the G.I. Joe comic just has a lot going on in it right now, and I like the idea of what this story is trying to be. More of a character-driven story. About Storm Shadow, who is one of the kind of main characters of the G.I. Joe comic. And it's about Storm Shadow, Cobra Commander. And it's hard. The story still manages to be kind of about Snake Eyes without Snake Eyes being there. And what's hard is, I think it would have been a better story with Snake Eyes there. Like, obviously you can't, in the first issue, the first half of the story where they're recounting the origins, it, doesn't really make sense to have him there. Snake Eyes doesn't talk, so you don't want him in a super dialogue heavy issue. But it would have made sense if, Storm Shadow brought him over, was explaining to Snake Eyes that, hey, Cobra Commander, you and Cobra Commander have this, like, strange connection that you don't even know about. You and Cobra Commander had that before he died. So, like, hey, so by the way. So yeah, that would have been a cool idea, and then you would have gotten to see Snake Eyes and Storm Shadow actually working together, busting heads, and then, obviously would have been great to see Snake Eyes and Storm Shadow work together to take down Zartan. That's kind of where I would have gone with the issue. But it's fine as is. And it's hard. What I'm struggling with right now is I don't like this story, like, hardly at all. But I can't think of why. Like, I guess it is just the comic really trying its best to interlace everything. I don't like that as an idea. Super connecting Snake Eyes and Cobra Commander. It's interesting, but I don't like it. Especially, again, with some stuff that happens later in the comic, because they do this again and again and again. I didn't even really like it when they did that with Zartan, though, to be fair, where they had him kill off the Hard Master, kind of connecting Zartan in with Storm Shadow and Snake Eyes and the ninja clans. Like, I didn't like that either, to be fair. So yeah, it's a perfectly passable story. I'd recommend reading it at least once. It is an important part of the G.I. Joe canon of the time. And that second issue, the silent issue, is really good. Like, the Paul Ryan's artwork is good. He has a really clear narrative way of telling the story. And I think it was a great call bringing him in instead of asking Marshall Rogers or Ron Wagner or any of the other artists who have been working on G.I. Joe lately. I think it was a good idea bringing Paul Ryan in instead. Because those other guys, they're not bad. But they're not good enough to carry a comic without words in it. So yeah, that's really all I got on these issues of G.I. Joe, though. Oddly written, decent artwork. They create an interesting story. I guess I would say as part of the overall story of G.I. Joe, I do find myself recommending them. But yeah, yeah. So that's really all I got for you today. So yeah, I'm just another guy named James. I'll see you guys next time. Goodbye.